Scriven.
Thank you, my Lords. And I'm pleased to move this important debate on human rights issues within Bahrain. I'd like to start by thanking noble Lords who have put their names down to speak, and to the many organisations who have sent briefing notes to us, and particularly the comprehensive briefing note by the Lords Library. It's important to have this debate, and what's happened in Bahrain today shows us why it is important that this debate is had. Today, Bahrain's lower criminal court sentenced former opposition leader Ibrahim Sharif to 6 months' imprisonment and a 500 Bahrainian dinar fine to suspend the execution of the sentence for tweeting criticism of Sudan's president. Since December 2018, Sudan has been rocked by popular protests against the 30-year-old regime of the president there. Ibrahim Sharif is the former leader of the secular opposition party in Bahrain, which was dissolved earlier this year in the crackdown against civil society in the kingdom. Ibrahim has spent time in Bahrain's notorious Jau prison and for his role in the pro-democracy protests of 2011. His only tweet was in the 25th of December 2018, when he basically said that the cities of Sudan should rise up, and calling for the people of Sudan to be free. The history of the UK and Bahrain goes back many years, 200-year celebration, and it is a special relationship between the people of Bahrain and the people of Britain and the United Kingdom. But it is not one that should be exercised in a moral vacuum. It is not one that should turn away when human rights abuses are being committed. In fact, because of our history and because of the relationship, it is our moral, legal and political responsibility to speak up and to speak out when there are human rights abuses, not just privately but also publicly. Recent UK policy towards Bahrain since the Arab Spring has shown that a gift of a £40 million naval base has been made by the King of Bahrain. UK arms sales equate to about £120 million. Importantly, when we say that we want to uphold human rights, law and the judicial system, we are doing so by not just saying we want that, but we are investing as British taxpayers over the last 7 years over £6 million in a very opaque fund. And it is there to, as the government says, to strengthen the rule of law and to ensure that oversight bodies make sure that human rights are upheld. This fund is opaque and secretive. Despite requests by both civil society and myself through parliamentary questions, the policy of the government has changed on the Integrated Activity Fund. They used to say who the beneficiaries were. They are now refusing to say who the beneficiaries are of that fund. I accept, and others accept, that some may be military or defence or intelligence organisations. So could I ask the Minister, why has the policy changed of not telling the public how their money is being spent in upholding justice and strengthening the rule of law in Bahrain for those organisations that fall out of defence and security? The Foreign Affairs Committee itself, back in September 18, cited the lack of transparency on this particular fund. So let's look at the rule of law and human rights in the judicial system since 2011. The noble Lord Soley, who is taking part in this debate later, gave a report, was a joint author of a report in 2014, which highlighted some of the issues. However, things have got worse since 2014. The return of the death penalty has started in Bahrain. In 2017, the execution of 3 men. The UN described these as extrajudicial killings. The closing down of the last independent and free press, and the jailing of journalists. In March 2018, the Interior Minister made it very clear that there would be a severe crackdown on anyone who used online condemnation of the government. 850 people have had their citizenship revoked 304 in 2018 alone. Human rights bodies estimate that 4,000 political prisoners have been arbitrarily arrested, denied their freedom, possibly tortured, sexually abused and been put in custody. They have been forced to sign confessions of guilt under potential torture. The UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detention in 2018 said there was widespread and systematic human rights abuses. Not one, not two, but widespread and systematic, in violation of international law and a potential crimes against humanity. It seems, my lords, that there are abuses. We cannot stand by and say that we are turning a blind eye just because we are trying to keep stability within that region. We have a moral duty to say that enough is enough. We have our friendship to say, and we have policies and our role within international law to do so. The oversight bodies that we are investing in, the police, the courts and the prison services, which taxpayers' money are investing in, when international bodies such as the UN or Amnesty International look at them, they say there is extensive evidence that they are compliant in human rights abuses. The UN Committee Against Torture condemned the Ombudsman and other oversight bodies as neither being effective or independent. They talked both about the Interior Ministry interfering as well as particular and parliamentary interference on these oversight bodies. Amnesty International has pointed out that when cases go there, they are ignored. And my own experience, my lords, is of that. I've done what the government have asked me to do in parliamentary question after parliamentary question. They've said that people should go to the oversight bodies. I have been to those oversight bodies on individual cases. I am still waiting for replies. Going back to November, there are cases of families talking to those bodies and asking for a mammogram, and 6 months later, action not properly being taken. The oversight bodies are not working, and it is time for the government to have an independent review. So could I ask the government, what independent review has been undertaken or will they undertake on these oversight bodies? And I wish to come, my lords, in my last 3 minutes to 3 cases. Listening to us today are the families of some people who are actually in jail and being imprisoned. The first one is Syed Ahmed Awalwadi, who is listening here tonight. He is the family of Syed, who is a UK-based Bahraini human rights activist, have been tortured and unlawfully convicted in Bahrain in relation to Mr Awalwadi's human rights work here in the UK. On the 30th of October 2017, Mr Awalwadi's brother-in-law, Syed Nazar, mother-in-law Haji Mansour Hassan and cousin Mahmoud Marzouk were sentenced to 3 years imprisonment following what was internationally condemned as a flawed trial. Subsequently, they have received human rights abuses and been denied privileges within jail, particularly at the town prison where the commander there, Lieutenant Colonel Al-Bodari, has basically not kept basic human rights laws and conventions in terms of allowing them access to their family and other medical provision. Could I ask the Minister, what independent assessment have they made of this particular case? There is also Ali Mushmia here. He is the son of a leading human rights activist and a leading figure and the former General Secretary of the Hack Movement for Liberty and Democracy. Hassan is 72 and was sentenced to life imprisonment in 2011. During his detention, trial and incarceration, the Bahraini authorities subject him to severe human rights abuses and violations. Despite questions in this House, the government says that he should go to the independent bodies. The independent body says there have been no violations. However, Ali sat outside the Bahraini embassy and did a hunger strike. Can the Minister tell him that his father's treatment is not what he is seeing and that he is being abused? And why do they take the word of the oversight bodies? There are clearly human rights abuses, and I ask the Minister, what assessment has been done of our policy to ensure that human rights are being upheld, and particularly what independent evidence that the Integrated Activity Fund is improving the oversight bodies, police and prison, and not contributing to human rights abuses in Bahrain?
Let me congratulate the Noble Lord Scriven for bringing this important matter to the House, and I know he has been a particularly tenacious member in ensuring these issues are followed through and addressed on several occasions. Bahrain remains a key regional partner for the UK. As the Noble Lord said, we've worked together for over 200 years. We share many interests in common and an unequivocal commitment to promote peace and security in the Gulf. I respect the work of the Minister for the Middle East, who talks about the many areas of bilateral collaboration: trade and investment, defence and security, the environment, education. We have many students being educated in the UK, and certainly we have some very happy Bahraini students at the University of Hull, where I happen to be Chancellor. But nevertheless, there are serious issues concerning human rights and the importance we all share of advancing human rights internationally is one to which we must give priority. The Minister is correct to identify Bahrain as a human rights priority for the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. The Noble Lord has talked about political reprisals. He's talked about the family, who I'm pleased to hear today, of Saeed al-Wadi. It's worrying that the Supreme Court of Bahrain upheld those sentences only this year, despite the conclusions of the United Nations Arbitrary Detention Working Group, Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International. Concern has been raised about arbitrary and extrajudicial detention, the use of torture and ill treatment as a means of eliciting unreliable confessions. Any declared commitment to freedom of expression is undermined by a high number of arrests and prosecutions of individuals who've criticised political figures. And there have been a disquieting number of incidents where journalists, opposition politicians, lawyers and human rights activists have been subjected to travel bans. We've all noted them. But there are paradoxes and there are contradictions in the situation. Bahrain was the first Arab state to achieve educational equality, the first country in the region to introduce public education for girls. In spite of a remaining disparity in the legal equality between Bahraini men and women, Bahrain has historically been a leader in advancing gender equality in the Middle East. They have the fastest rate of growth for women's economic participation, the first Arab country to appoint female ambassadors to Britain and the USA. The National Plan for the Advancement of Bahraini Women and the ongoing work of the Supreme Council for Women are welcome, but it would be valuable to hear from the Minister some of the up-to-date evidence around these bodies and the role of women in the light of an anxiety that somehow there's been a deterioration in all that had seemed encouraging. We respect the cultural and moral diversity, the universality of human rights and non-discrimination. They must be recognised and people should be held to account. But we should act as a critical friend and urge the government of Bahrain to return to the path of progress. I look forward to the Minister's comments. We have a long-term relationship. There are ongoing concerns. We hope that we can work with Bahrain to ensure that they get back on the path of progress.
Very important but very short debate, and I greatly regret that we've all only got a couple of minutes to say what we need to say. And I won't repeat some of what Baroness Bottomley has just said about the advances that have been made in Bahrain. And it wasn't just female ambassadors to the UK and US and other countries, but also of different religious faiths, which is important. But I would say to Lord Scriven, who's clearly feels very strongly on this, and rightly, and he makes a couple of points about relating to my report, and perhaps it's 4 years ago, now 5 years ago, perhaps this is a good time for me to consider revisiting it and looking at what had happened. I would criticise them at the time for not allowing the UN investigator on torture to visit, and indeed I criticised them also because we couldn't visit the prisons. But I have to say, if you look at what Bahrain was setting up with the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry following the riots, it was way ahead of most other countries in the region. And indeed, if you ask me which country I'd like to live in, if I had to do so in the Middle East, I would probably choose Bahrain as one of the best. That doesn't mean, and indeed the ambassador said this to me the other day, it doesn't mean all is perfect. It certainly isn't. But I say this, there is something that the Noble Lord is missing that is profoundly important, and it is the situation that Bahrain is in this incredibly unstable region. Bahrain is just a mile or two down a causeway from Saudi Arabia, a Sunni power, which is in conflict with Iran, just across the water from Bahrain, which is a Shia power. And when I looked at the book given to me by the Al-Wafaq recently, the Al-Wafaq party, which incidentally left the parliament of their own will, and we criticised them for it. They needn't have left. It would have been better if they'd stayed and stood for election. But this book is an expensively produced book. Fine, I have no problem with that, although it would be good to know how it's financed. Because, as the Noble Lord has said, there are questions about other finances. There's questions about the financing of Al-Wafaq. And I want to say, one of the gentlemen I have seen on a number of occasions, who's resident in Britain, Mr. Ali Al-Aswad, who's a strong supporter and was a member of Parliament of the Al-Wafaq group, he is very good, and he emphasises that if they started supporting violence, he would not support them anymore. I understand that, but he also understood what the point that I'm making about the impossible position of Bahrain between two competing regional superpowers, one Shia, one Sunni, and recognise, and it says it in this book produced by Al-Wafaq, and it's written by Sheikh Ali Salman, the man currently in prison, where it starts off by explaining the Shia history of Bahrain. The Shia population is a majority, the Sunni population is a minority. When I asked the king there 4 or 5 years ago what he felt about that, he was quite passionately saying, I am a Muslim first, I am not a Shia or a Sunni. And I understand that, but I have to say, religion, like other ideologies, is always subject to splits. And those splits can be violent, and they are. And you do need to understand in this that Bahrain does not want to be in the position of Yemen, which is already part of the conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia. So I say to the Noble Lord, by all means keep questioning this, but put it in the round, look at it in that situation, and ask yourself what you would do if you were a minority community of Sunnis looking across the water to Iran and wondering what happens to you if they take over. It cannot be ignored. It is part of the strategic geopolitics of the region.
Can I remind Noble Lords that when the clock gets to 3 minutes, that is 3 minutes completed?
My Lords, I too would like to congratulate the Noble Lord Scriven for tabling this very important debate and for his powerful contribution. And I declare my interest as an officer of the Parliamentary Human Rights Group. My Lords, following the recommendations of the 2011 Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry report, a number of mechanisms were put in place by the government to demonstrate its support for international human rights. And for many of those involved, this was a very encouraging and exciting time. They set up the National Institute for Human Rights, the Ministry of Interior Ombudsman, and the Prisoners and Detainees Rights Commission. And these bodies are doing some positive work. The Parliamentary Human Rights Group has had much positive contact with the Ombudsman, and currently we are in correspondence with him about failures in detainee treatment, particularly an inadequate provision of health care. However, welcome as these developments are, The existence of these mechanisms cannot disguise the Bahraini government's obvious lack of political will for the more substantive political, institutional and legal reforms needed to ensure Bahraini citizens enjoy their fundamental rights, and human rights defenders and members of the political opposition are no longer persecuted. The FCO has been funding human rights institutions in Bahrain for a number of years. During that time, the level of criticism of Bahrain for human rights violations has increased. Criticism from the United Nations Human Rights Council, from the UN Special Rapporteur Dr. Agnes Kalamard on extrajudicial killings, who described the 2017 executions of 3 people in Bahrain as extrajudicial executions. A number of respected NGOs have been very critical, as have many UK parliamentarians. This, my lords, raises difficult questions about the role of the FCO in Bahrain that need answering. Could I therefore ask the noble lady, the Minister, whose commitment to human rights is beyond doubt, has the FCO recently reassessed whether its continuing financial support for human rights work in Bahrain is appropriate? The noble Lord Scriven said there should be an independent review. Could the noble lady, the Minister, consider that? And does she agree? Bearing in mind the fact that the abuses of human rights in Bahrain would most likely trigger further radicalisation, polarisation and conflict in what the noble Lord Soley has already explained is a very difficult arena which to work. And finally, could I say that the FCO is valued throughout the world for the support UK diplomats give to human rights NGOs and activists? Is the noble lady, the Minister, satisfied that human rights activists in Bahrain are well supported by our diplomats there?
My Lords, my interest in Bahrain is as Vice Chair of CMAC and goes back to when I was the Defence Minister and had some responsibility for defence cooperation between our two countries. We do have vital national security and economic interest in maintaining and developing our relationship with Bahrain, and I was involved in the early stages of setting up our strategically vital naval support facilities there. In an uncertain world, Bahrain is a loyal and important ally. As my noble friend said, it has been a staunch supporter of the UK for over 200 years. We do need to keep criticism of Bahrain in perspective and be mindful of the regional and security context. Bahrain's scope for progressive political development is limited by the need to keep in step with its GCC neighbours, a point very well made by the noble Lord Slowly. Bahrain is a tolerant society. There are historic tensions deriving from a large Shia population, but the great majority of Shia live happily there, and many have senior positions in government. They strongly oppose the actions of a very small violent majority. It is the leading country in the Gulf region in terms of political development, education for all, freedom of religion, employment law, and the emancipation of women. It is one of only 2 GCC states with a freely elected parliament, the current speaker of which is a woman. And my noble friend mentioned the 2 women who were ambassadors to the UK and the USA, one a Christian and the other Jewish. The capital, Manama, is a religiously diverse city, housing Sunni, Shia, Christian, Jewish and Hindu places of worship. The Council of Ministers regularly has at least one and often several female ministers. Bahrain's appointed upper house of parliament always includes at least one member of Bahrain's Jewish and Christian communities, both female currently, and someone with a registered disability. Bahrain has made progress with our human rights reforms. As part of the British broader assistance of Bahraini reform, the UK has been working with Bahrain's independent human rights oversight bodies since their creation, the first in the region following recommendations from the Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry in 2012. Our work has supported the building of effective institutions which hold the Bahraini government to account. They have demonstrated their abilities, including through the prosecution of more than 80 police officers accused of human rights abuses. My Lords, of course, there is always more that can be done, and I think the Bahraini government themselves recognise this. But let us not lose sight of the fact that there is genuine, effective progress in a region where change is often hard to come by.
I too thank Lord Scriven for stewarding this debate. I have never visited Bahrain, but I believe it is a modern, moderate Arab country, a close ally of the United Kingdom. It has open and tolerant society that respects all religions and cultures. It is striving for gender balance, women's empowerment, and workers' rights. If you look at the religious freedom in Bahrain, I believe Bahrain's capital, Manama, is one of the most religiously diverse cities in GCC, with places of worship of Sunni, Shia, Christian, Jewish, Sikh, and Hindu faiths across the city. Bahrain also has a history of appointing non-Muslim ambassadors, both Christian and Jews, for example, to UK and USA, as it's been mentioned earlier. Bahrain was the first country in the region to introduce public education for girls in 1920s, first Arab state to achieve education equality as a part of the UNESCO 2010 Education for All Development Index. According to Bahrain's government statistics, women make up over 49% of the public sector employees, over 50% of managerial positions. I believe Bahrain is currently ranked in Tier 1 by the US State Department 2018 for its efforts to counter human trafficking. Bahrain has gone through significant reforms to sponsorship system through the flexible work permit, enabling work without sponsor. However, I'm aware of some of the reports of violations of human rights in the country, reported by some credible international organizations. My Lords, no excuse can be accepted for violation of human rights. With Bahrain keeping in mind the country's demographics and surrounding political and religious environment, including Iranian and Saudi influences, I suggest the United Kingdom, as a friend of Bahrain, should help Bahrain to improve its level of tolerance and understanding of diverse political and religious views, instead of taking harsh measures that amount to violations of human rights, and have a free and fair justice system that meets international standards.
My Lords, I'd like to begin by thanking Lord Scriven for bringing this important debate before your Lordship's House. In so doing, Lord Scriven brings before us what is a very prescient example of the delicate balance required between the UK using influence to improve human rights, while at the same time being aware that if influence is to be successfully brought, it must be as a critical friend. In Bahrain, there are clearly significant obstacles and obstructions to freedom of assembly and freedom of movement as we would understand them. Protests remain banned in the capital Manama, and over 90 Bahrainis are banned from travelling abroad without judicial warrant. At the same time, there are accusations of impunity for those who acted outside the law in 2011. And, like many noble lords, I am concerned that since April 2017, the judicial system has been amended to allow the military courts to try civilians, surely a retrograde step. However, in assessing all these deficiencies, I am sure the government will take cognizance of the real instability and interference that the kingdom faces, especially from Iran. Bahrain, of course, is led by a Sunni government, but does have, as we've heard, especially from Noble Lord Soley, a majority Shia population. And the UK government has a role to assess any sectarian discrimination, but also to help build community cohesion within Bahrain. Bahrain is an important strategic partner of the United Kingdom, but is, my lords, a small, relatively new state with a fragile religious demography and what can only be described as a very tough neighbourhood. This context must be remembered when seeking to support Bahrain improve human rights, and there are positives that, again, as we've heard from the noble Lord Soley, do not exist in similar Gulf states. Bahrain, as we've heard, has one of the best records in the Gulf for religious diversity, as well as for more liberal positions on women's rights and an exemplary record on human trafficking. There are also 4 pillars of scrutiny, as we've heard: the Ombudsman, the Prisoners and Detainees Rights Commission, the Special Investigations Unit and National Human Rights Commission. The United Kingdom has an important role in supporting and building capacity in all these oversight bodies to ensure that they are fully functioning. I do find it spurious, my lords, to say that providing good practice support to our friend and ally is in some way the British government condoning or financially supporting human rights abuses. My lord, I look forward to hearing my noble friend the Minister's response to the efficacy of the oversight organisations within Bahrain and how the government intends to remain a critical but effective friend for Bahrain.
My Lord, I think Lord Scriven was right to put this important debate into the wider context of a very long-standing friendship between the people of this country and the people of Bahrain. And if you add to that Lord Solly's very significant points of the region in which the Bahrainis live, sandwiched between Iran on the one side and Saudi Arabia on the other, a rivalry between 2 important regional powers, added to that the Sunni-Shia tensions, then of course we see Bahrain living in difficult circumstances. And if I may rather strongly add to that, that they are in Bahrain living in the shadow of Saudi Arabia, where we have a crown prince who is ambitious to reform the economy, but is using repressive measures, I have to say, in order to try and achieve this. And Bahrain lives in the shadow of that, and it has repercussions for Bahrain. I believe our interests are very strongly in the direction of evolving constitutional monarchies in the Gulf countries, and above all in Bahrain, if we want stability there, as we do. Baroness Bottomley was so right to point out that there have been considerable achievements in Bahrain over the last few decades on women's rights, for example, and on freedom of religion. And that in itself is striking. But I want to focus on one thing, really, and that is this, that following the Arab Spring of 2011, the King and the Crown Prince were bold enough to establish this independent commission of inquiry, led by Mr. Bassiouni, a distinguished lawyer from Egypt. And that inquiry, I must say, would we in this country, would any government in this country set up a completely independent commission to tell us how to advise us to how to run our affairs? I doubt it. It was a bold decision. But they made important recommendations I think Lady Stern referred to. And those recommendations were to set up oversight bodies which have been established, the National Institute for Human Rights, the Ombudsman, and so on. And that was important. The problem and the worry, I think, is that since then, in the last 2 or 3 years, there has been a deterioration in standards of human rights in Bahrain, and that is damaging to Bahrain, it is damaging to our interests and our friendship with Bahrain. So the question I think I have for the Minister is, what is the government's assessment of the progress of that independent commission, all the recommendations in that commission? How many of those recommendations have been implemented? How transparent and effective are those recommendations? I think it would be very helpful to know from the government what their assessment is. The UK's relationship with Bahrain is singly important. We have a base there which helps to protect Bahrain. We give technical assistance on human rights issues. So we are entitled to have a free expression of views between each other as to how we can help Bahrain to greater stability. And I hope the government, the Minister, will summarise what we're doing to help them in that progress.
My Lords, I thank the noble Lord Scriven for initiating this debate. Human rights, wherever they may be, are dear to us all, for we can only enjoy our rights if we have respect for the rights of others. I declare a couple of interests. I am the chairman of the Centre for Islamic Finance at the University of Bolton, where we run a joint master's degree with the Bahrain Institute of Banking and Finance. And I was also the chairman and now vice president of the Conservative Middle East Council, where I first came to know Bahrain and to meet members of the government and the opposition and to make many friends. And it is in that spirit of friendship that I speak this evening. The violence that rocked the Middle East during the Arab Spring left its scars on Bahrain, a small country where it was never an issue if you were Sunni or Shia, or for that matter, Jewish, Christian or Hindu, was suddenly thrown into turbulence during the 2011 uprisings. The ensuing troubles were a cause of sadness and deep concern to a country which had long embraced democracy, where women had been given the vote in 1950, where men and women, Sunni and Shia, were free to stand in all elections, and where significant reforms, including human rights, were already taking form under the office of the Crown Prince. The Crown Prince responded to these events by opening up a dialogue with all who chose to participate, and the government initiated a commission of inquiry, as the Noble Lord Luce said, a bold decision. And it was to explain both of these initiatives that in 2012 I first met a delegation from the Shura Council and realised the determination of Bahrain to learn from what had happened and to put in place systems with strong and independent oversight. These initiatives led to the reforms, and in the intervening years I have had the pleasure of meeting the Ministry of Interior Ombudsman with responsibility for prisons and members of the National Institution of Human Rights, who are an independent body with a wide-ranging mandate to protect human rights. I was impressed by the quality of the people I met and their sincerity and determination to do the right thing, and there have been a number of prosecutions of officials for human rights abuses, and I hope that they will read today's debates and look to see what they might do in the future to allay some of the fears that have been raised this evening. My Lords, I know that for some the pace of change and reform across the Middle East as a whole isn't fast enough. But too often these countries, who are our good and old friends, are not given due credit for the changes they have effected and for the long-standing rights they do afford their citizens. I often think that is because our Arab friends are too reticent to blow their own trumpet, nor, as the Noble Lord Solly so eloquently explained, do we take enough account of the difficult political tensions in the region. My noble friend Lord Astor asked, is there more to do in Bahrain? Of course there is, just as there is more to do in nearly every corner of the world. But a country that has set up organisations that I have already mentioned, that has the fastest growth rate internationally for the economic participation of women, that has gone to considerable efforts to counter human trafficking, and that protects workers' rights with strong and effective trade unions, can't be doing it all wrong. And I commend the government and the government of Bahrain for their continuing work to ensure the best rights and protections for all who live and work in the kingdom.
My Lords, I too thank my noble friend for introducing this debate, and it's almost as if we're debating two different countries. Which one is Bahrain? Although Bahrain is a constitutional monarchy with an elected National Assembly, political power ultimately rests with the ruling family. And as we've heard, tensions between the majority Shiites and the ruling minority Sunnis, with greater and political and economic power, exists in Bahrain. In 2011, as part of the Arab Spring, as we've heard, more than 100,000 people engaged in peaceful protests. They were brutally repressed with the help of Saudi troops. A crackdown on political opposition and freedom of expression has followed. The Bahrain Independent Commission of Inquiry, to which others have referred, was established by the Bahraini government to investigate. It made 26 recommendations, which the government then said they'd implemented. Although it is right to welcome that, human rights groups have criticised the recommendations this week, and that even these have not been fully carried through, as other noble lords have mentioned. The last independent newspaper was suspended in 2017. All political opposition groups have been dissolved. Political parties are not permitted. Public protests are banned in the capital. Recent parliamentary elections were not considered free and fair. I hope that we do not hear after this debate any actions against those who are attending this debate or their friends and families. From 2006, Bahrain has had a draconian anti-terror law. It is used to justify the detention of many anti-government activists. Confessions are obtained under torture. Freedom of assembly and association can be defined as terrorist,
minors have been arrested under the Act. In 2013, amendments were made to this law, including the revocation of citizenship. More than 800 Bahrainis, including journalists and politicians, have had their citizenship revoked since 2012, leaving most stateless. Bahrain will not admit organisations such as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, or the UN Special Rapporteur on Torture. In 2017, a constitutional amendment allowed military trials for civilians who were deemed a threat to Bahrain's independence, sovereignty and security. There has been an increase in the use of death sentences. The FCO listed Bahrain as a human rights priority country in 2018 for the year 2017. The UK has contributed £5 million to support reform, but human rights groups such as Reprieve have accused the government of not being sufficiently transparent or effective. I recognise the difficulty in this area. We provide training for Bahrain's armed forces, we have the naval base, and against this background of increasing human rights abuses, we are increasing arms sales. None of this is likely to lead to stability.
My Lords, I too would like to thank the Noble Lord for initiating this debate. As Alistair Burt said at the end of last year, that in considering the differing opinions about Bahrain, there are elements of truth on both sides. Compared to most of its close neighbours, women have greater freedom, as we've heard, there's greater freedom of worship, and human rights are a good deal better. The government argues that a strong partnership is based on mutual interest, shared threats, and the desire to promote greater security and peace in the Gulf, exemplified, as the Noble Lord said, with the UK Naval Support Facility. Alistair Burt suggests this strong partnership means we can express our concerns about human rights in a frank and open way, publicly but more often in private. My Lords, there's no doubt there's merit in the engagement approach, working with international partners and civil society organisations to promote and defend universal freedoms and to bring about positive change. But just how is the government measuring the success of engagement in achieving positive change? Freedom House suggests that Bahrain is more oppressive and less free than when it was just 6 years ago. As reported in The Guardian, last November general elections were considered to be a sham, prohibiting members of opposition groups from running. Reprisals targeting protesters, journalists, human rights defenders have become commonplace. And as we've heard, the only independent newspaper was forcibly closed in 2017. And there's currently an estimate of 4,000 political prisoners. So what is the government's view on the situation of human rights defenders in Bahrain? What assessment has been conducted about our investment? And of course, on what basis does the FCO deem the oversight bodies in Bahrain independent, effective, and capable of conducting swift and thorough investigations? And my final point is, as we've heard, executions have resumed in January 2017. Will the United Kingdom, will the Noble Lady the Minister say, will the United Kingdom publicly call upon the Bahraini government to abolish the death penalty?
My Lords, may I first of all thank the Noble Lord, Lord Scriven, for securing this debate, and thank all Noble Lords who have contributed. It was interesting, a number of your Lordships referred to the nature of the relationship between the United Kingdom and Bahrain. And of course, Bahrain is a key partner of the UK. We cooperate on defence, on security, on trade and on regional issues. And as a number of your Lordships observed, our new UK naval support facilities provide the first permanent UK naval presence east of Suez since 1971 and support joint counter-terrorism, counter-piracy and maritime security operations. Now, this relationship benefits UK prosperity. As of September last year, total trade in goods and services had increased by almost 65% compared to the previous 12 months. Naturally, many of your lordships focused on the issue of human rights, and as the British government has made clear and Bahrain has acknowledged, there remains further work to do in this area. Indeed, the Foreign and Commonwealth Office continues to flag Bahrain as a human rights priority country. Indeed, the noble Lady Baroness Stern acknowledged that progress has been made, but she rightly flagged up concerns. I mean, she did note that the FCO strongly committed to supporting human rights around the world, and can I reassure her and other members of this House that we keep all programme work under regular review, and we continue to believe our support to Bahrain's ambitious reform initiatives is the best way to support progress. Can I make clear to your lordships that we have consistently raised issues of concern to us with the government of Bahrain? The noble Lord Collins specifically referred to the death penalty. Your lordships will be aware that the United Kingdom deplores the use of the death penalty anywhere in the world. We condemn that, and quite rightly your lordships take the same view. We remain committed to promoting and defending universal freedoms and human rights at home and abroad. And the strength of our relationship with Bahrain means that we can express our concerns frankly, openly, regularly, and at senior levels, and we do that. And while we do comment publicly, more often the detail and depth of our engagement takes place behind the scenes. It is our assessment that's the best way to influence change through private engagement, dialogue and cooperation. And indeed, my noble friend Lord McInnes, I thought, spoke with wisdom on that approach, and he rightly pointed out there is a need to strike the important balance. If your lordships are interested in the Foreign Commonwealth Office Human Rights and Democracy report, that was published last October, and it outlines action that we have taken. Now, let me make clear that the government of Bahrain readily acknowledges that there is more they can do, and indeed it has undertaken reforms and addressed issues, often with UK assistance. Can I say to the noble Lord Luce that we do provide technical assistance to Bahrain in order to influence and support change? All training provided is in line with international standards and fully complies with our domestic and international human rights obligations. And we believe that technical reform assistance makes a major contribution to the strength of our bilateral relationship. We're committed to supporting Bahrain-led reform. We're confident of its positive impact for people in Bahrain across a variety of areas. And these include judicial reform, youth engagement and empowerment, civil society, combating modern slavery, and support to human rights oversight bodies. Now, these important oversight bodies, to which a number of your lordships referred, hold state institutions to account. They include the National Institute of Human Rights, the Ministry of Interior Ombudsman, the Special Investigations Unit, and the Prisoner and Detainees Rights Commission. And this was referred to by a number of your lordships, and some of your lordships have suggested that they fail in their fundamental duties. Let me say I do not accept that. We believe that they are effective in addressing allegations of torture and mistreatment in detention. And this has been demonstrated through the prosecution of police officers accused of human rights abuses. My noble friend Lord Astor referred to that. There is work by the Special Investigations Unit directly resulted in the retrial of Mohammed Ramadan and Hussein Musa, who were originally sentenced to death in 2014. And the Ministry of Interior's Ombudsman's Office has also investigated serious cases, including deaths in custody. And as the first such organisations established in the region, they have more to do, but the UK continues to work with them to encourage development of their skills and capacity. And I think, my lords, it is important that we acknowledge areas where Bahrain's human rights approach actually aligns with our own, and I should like to highlight three. Firstly, Bahrain is a regional leader in combating the exploitation of migrant workers. The Bahraini government has increased transparency and introduced a victim-centred approach. I think it was the noble Lord Hussein who referred to the important achievement of Bahrain in that the United States Department's annual Trafficking in Persons report, Bahrain has achieved Tier 1 status, and that means it meets its minimum standards for the elimination of trafficking trafficking, and importantly, it's the first country in the Gulf to do so. And then secondly, as my noble friend Baroness Bottomley observed, Bahrain is playing a leading role in the region in protecting and safeguarding women's rights. Women's organisations are active in Bahrain and freely run campaigns calling for equality, especially in citizenship's rights. And finally, freedom of religion is guaranteed by the Bahraini constitution. Bahrain is home to churches, a synagogue, and the region's oldest Hindu temple. And members of all religions coexist and contribute to society. And my noble friend Baroness Morris is right. We should acknowledge these achievements. They are positive developments, and we should welcome that they are happening. Now, a number of your lordships have raised specific points. I'm pretty pushed for time, but let me see if I can deal with some of them. The noble Lord Scriven raised the case of Ibrahim Sharif. We are aware of the case. UK officials attended the trial, I beg your pardon, and we understand that Mr Sharif's lawyer will appeal through the courts, and we urge the court to protect freedom of expression for all citizens. The noble Lord Scriven and the noble Lady Baroness Northover also raised the Integrated Activity Fund. Well, all reform assistance goes through a rigorous and comprehensive assessment process to ensure compliance with our domestic and international human rights obligations. Now, I should make clear that as many projects and programme activities deliver access across the whole region, it's not possible to provide a breakdown according to each beneficiary state, including Bahrain.
Very, very quickly. Up until 2 years ago, that's exactly what happened. And I asked why the policy changed. You could do that up until 2 years ago, and did.
Well, I shall make further investigation, and if I elicit any more information, I shall certainly communicate with the noble lord. He also raised the situation of Mr Al-Waday's family members, and we have raised the cases of these family members at senior levels with the Bahraini government. A number of your lordships raised the noble Lord Solly, the noble Lord Luce, and my noble friend Baroness Moritz all raised the matter of Bahrain's Independent Commission of Inquiry. And that commission was a very important development, and the government of Bahrain has made significant strides in implementing the wide range of reforms recommended by the Commission of Inquiry, and reform continues under the ambitious government action plan. I think the noble Lord Collins raised the matter of keeping our engagement under regular review. Well, we continue to believe that our partnership is effective. Our embassy in Manama monitors and assesses the situation on the ground, and we are certainly anxious to ensure that the help we provide is delivering results at the ground level where that help is intended to provide improvement. My lords, I have run out of time, for which I apologise. I will look at Hansard, and any contributions I have not been able to acknowledge or to which I have not been able to respond, I shall undertake to write to your lordships.
Lord Purvis of Tweed.
My Lords, I'm grateful for the opportunity of moving these three amendments in my name this evening. And in doing so, I wish to